All right, we're going to go ahead and begin then. So welcome again to SRS 2021. Our first speaker today is going to be Katie Lawton, and Katie will be speaking on exploring premature detachment of radio transmitters used on bats in telemetry surveys. Keep in mind, questions will be welcome, but not until the end of her presentation. Any questions that you have, you can submit to me via the chat bar as the host. All right, go ahead, Katie. Let's see. There you are.
Hi, everyone.
There you go, Katie.
Thank you. Now I can share my screen. Okay, as she said, my name is Katie Lawton, and today I will be talking about exploring premature detachment of radio transmitters used on bats in telemetry surveys. So telemetry is very important for understanding wildlife ecology. It's basically a way of just tracking the location of an animal using an antenna, a transmitter with an antenna on the animal, and then a tracker. For birds and bats in particular, you have to be very careful about where you put the transmitter because it has to be small and light enough where it doesn't inhibit their flight pattern. So for bats, the main place that you put it is on their back between the shoulder blades, as you can see in this photo here. So telemetry is very important for gaining information about the wildlife ecology of bats. But the issue that we're having is that these transmitters are only staying on bats about 9 days on average, which is only about half of the potential battery life of these transmitters. So this led us to our two-part study to determine how transmitters are being removed by bats and to explore a method to prevent their premature detachment and gain the greatest amount of information from this data as possible. So we caught all of our bats in local Fort Worth parks and kept them in a flight facility on TCU's campus where none of their natural behaviors were inhibited, but we could just observe them and control their environment. Our first set of trials set out to determine whether brand made a difference in attachment times. So we compared Pacific Northwest National Laboratory as one brand and Wildlife Materials as another, hereafter called PNNL and WM. In the second set of trials, we set out to determine whether putting distasteful antenna coatings on the transmitters would prevent bats from chewing on them and keep them on longer. So we coated the antennas in either cayenne pepper, nail biting deterrent, Tabasco sauce, or some with none as a control. So in each trial, we tested the number of days transmitters remained attached, the percentage of transmitters with damage, the amount of damage, and the number of damage versus the number of days that they were attached. So our results from part one, when we compared the brands, we found that WM transmitters stayed attached significantly longer, but there was also a higher amount of damage with the WM transmitters, and a higher percentage of them showed damage. We also found that the longer the transmitters remained attached, the more bends they tended to have, which indicates that they were likely chewing on them. In part two, with the antenna coatings, we found that there was no significant difference between length of attachment or in terms of damage between the antenna coatings. When we tested the Tabasco sauce, it was particularly humid, and we think that this may have caused them to be removed much quicker than they normally would have. And so we removed the Tabasco sauce from the statistical analyses. There was also a strong correlation in the control group between the attachment time and the amount of damage, again, indicating chewing. However, the cayenne pepper showed a weak positive and nail bite showed a moderate positive correlation, indicating that they may have been chewing on them less. So what we got from these results was that while WM transmitters stayed attached significantly longer, they're still only remaining attached on average 10 days, which is significant with the previous study. And in the end, brand did not really end up making a difference because this is still only about 50% of their battery life potential. And for damage observed between brands, we found that there was damage to the antennas no matter what, and the coatings did not improve attachment times or damage. So our study found that in the end, antenna coatings did not really end up helping. However, some of the ones with the antenna coatings were removed in the same amount of time. And we found that bats, excuse me, Bats remove transmitters regardless of brand design or antenna coding. And also they may not only be putting antennas in their mouths to chew them. So in the future, we recommend modifying the antenna or integrating it into the body of the transmitter to prevent them removing them with their mouths, which is not currently an option, but it may become an option as the technology advances. So future research might include testing the effectiveness of different adhesives in attaching transmitters, the effectiveness of other distasteful antenna coatings, and examining the physiology of bat taste. Thank you, and I would love to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Katie. If anybody has any questions, they're welcome to go ahead and ask those. All right, Katie, it looks like you have one right here via chat. I can read that to you. So the first question here is from Dr. Gary Bohm. Does one bat remove the transmitter from another bat or from itself? And does this sort of removal ever cause fighting?
Yeah, so bats, they roost together. It's part of their natural behavior, and they also groom each other naturally in the wild. And so we did see that bats would sometimes groom the transmitters off of each other or off of themselves. And as far as I know, it didn't cause any sort of conflict within the bats, as it was just part of their normal grooming behavior.
Good, thank you. Another question here for figures 9 and 10. Since the WM transmitters were on longer than the PNML, wouldn't it make sense that they had a higher percentage that were damaged? And did you pull this info apart to try and remove this issue?
Yes, we did feel like it should have been, there should have been more damage since they were removed faster. But I think what we ended up settling on was that since the WM transmitters were heavier, slightly heavier and round and had a more hardy antenna, that they might have been more difficult to damage.
Good, thank you. Another question. Are there any similar results using other genre or species? Other genera or species?
So telemetry is used in pretty much any animal. I showed photos of them on rhinos and birds and hyenas. And so on other bird species, I am not sure about the length of attachment time sort of studies, but I'm sure that there are more studies on that.
Thank you. One final question for you, Katie. What kind of adhesive is used to attach these?
We used a permatype cement adhesive to basically just glue it onto the bat skin, and we trimmed the hair between their shoulder blades and applied that adhesive.
Very good. Thank you so much, Katie. Great job today.
Thank you.
Very good. All right, I'm going to now introduce our next speaker. Joining us next is Lauren Nagel, and she's going to be speaking to us about analysis of the Settlers of Catan.
Welcome everyone to my presentation on the optimal strategies for the Settlers of Catan using Markov chains. I'm Lauren Nagel from the Department of Mathematics, and my advisor on this project has been Dr. Drew Tomlin. Here I included a small overview of the game Catan itself. First off, we have the board, which consists of 18 terrain pieces and number tiles, indicating the resource and dice roll associated with the vertices around each hex. To begin, players place 2 of their settlement pieces down, as demonstrated by these white pieces here. The only thing is they must ensure that their pieces don't lie along the same edge. After that, players roll a dice and corresponding resources are given out. These resources include brick, lumber, wool, wheat, and ore. The objective of the game is to earn 10 victory points, which can be doled out in 5 different ways. To test out my findings, I constructed a simulation in Python where the computer runs through games as different players. Here's one example of such a game. The lines signify roads and the triangles are the settlements. As it progresses, you see stars appear, which represent cities in the game. During their turn, if a player has more than one option, the computer will be randomly chosen from a list of possibilities until all their resources are exhausted. Once a player reaches 10 points, the game stops as it has now, and I can see a breakdown of the point allocation. I approach the analysis of this game as a Markov process, which describes a model where one's given state is the only information necessary to predict future states. The states in my analysis of Catan are the different combinations of each resource one has in their hand. The values of the transition matrix are the probability of gaining another resource of a particular type, which is given by the number on the hex of a specific terrain. So here are two of my transition matrices for settlement positions in Catan. However, these are only the first 10 states as opposed to all 3,125 states. But we can still see how the matrix is structured. So vertex number 34 lies in between a forest, pasture, and fields tiles. So we get lumber, wool, and wheat from this resource settlement. Across the first row, that one wheat value is 3 out of 36 because that's a probability of rolling a 4. And now across the diagonal, it's the probability a state won't be changed after dice roll. However, this is not necessarily the probability that the player will not gain a resource, since all of the resources are capped at 4. We can see this more clearly on settlement 9, where across that 4-or row, the probability of remaining at that state is the sum of rolling for an or and not rolling for any resources. So from my transition matrices, I manipulated them into expected value vectors. Using these vectors, I pulled out the average number of turns before a player accumulates 4 victory points. From the starting position 934, you see that it takes about 46 turns to buy 2 settlements, which is the lowest for this particular pair. We can juxtapose this with the 3542 settlement position, where it only takes about 27 turns to get those 2 victory points by upgrading the settlements to cities. Looking at the breakdown of all the top 20 pairs, 27 was the lowest overall for those 4 victory points. However, the results may not hold for 10 victory points, but on the small scale, this 3542 was the best position. Then I'd just like to give a special thanks to my wonderful thesis advisor, Dr. Tomlin, and my committee members, Dr. Nolet and Dr. Sugar.
Very nice work. Thank you, Lauren. Is there anybody who has questions for her? All right, I have one in the chat for you. Congratulations, Lauren. I've played this game before, and now I know why I always lose. Are there any others? I have a question here from Drew Tomlin. How do you deal with matrices of that size?
For matrices this large, we run it through the program in Python, since they're able to do the inverses very quickly and hold all the values and just have a program to build them as well.
Thank you, Lauren. Any further questions? All right, very nice. Thank you so much. We'll be getting our next presentation in about 1 minute with Quang Trung. So Quang, if you want to be getting ready, we'll start in about 1 minute. All right, we'll wait for just another few seconds. All right, I would like to go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Quing Trung is going to speak to us about the domain invariant learning and vehicle re-identification task powered by deep neural networks. All right, so when you're ready, you may go ahead and begin.
Hi everyone. So today I will present about domain invariant learning in vehicle identification. So vehicle identification is really an important task in intelligent transportation system. Because we would like to know how to match vehicle across different cameras. Like when you see a video clip of vehicles, you would like to know which vehicle belongs to the other one. So in our research, we utilize the superior performance of deep neural network to extract discriminative features of each image, and so that we can calculate the distance between images and to know which image belongs to each other. So our motivation, we have two more motivation. The first one is that currently the vehicle re-identification usually used with optical character recognition. So it means that they will usually extract the number from the license plate and then they match with the system, with the database. But in fact, it's not always true, because when you have cases like image here, you can see that we cannot see the license plate in the pictures. So that we need to know like how to matching the image without the license plate. And the second thing is that the reality data set is relatively limited because it's a sub-learned data. So it's really private and only authority can access to that. So I would like to build a really a pipeline, a deep learning pipeline, so that it can learn multi-domain. So there are two main challenges in our research. The first one is interclass variability. This means that a vehicle may look different in the various viewpoints due to environment. The second one is interclass similarity. So that means that two vehicles may look similar, but they're actually different because they belong to the same production line. So as you can see in the picture here, the red car, actually they're different because this one have a sticker, this one doesn't have it. So it's just a minor difference, but it's really hard to distinguish. And the picture below, actually those cars are the same, but the left one looks blue, the right one looks gray. So I would like to talk about a methodology. We have loss function in our pipeline here. And for the loss function, we use triplet loss and the softmax loss. And we know that softmax loss can create a decision boundary, but it's not strong enough because you know for the interclass similarity, the red dot will really close to the blue dot. So the decision boundary cannot create effectively. So that we need to create a cluster of images so that we incorporate triplet loss into our data set, into our loss function, so that it will cluster the dot into one big group. Yeah. So our pipeline, including three main things: cyclogan, filtering policy, and IPNet. So the cyclogan try to learn mapping function from one domain to another domain using cycle-consistent adversarial network. So as you can see in the picture here, they can effectively create it can generate a new image based on a real image. So if we look closer, we can see a really really, I would say, amazing thing about cyclogan is that it can add in the sage, it can change the color, and it even can make an image become clearer, have higher quality. So it's really impressive. So the next thing I want to talk about is the filtering policy, because cyclogan is just a model, it's not perfect, so that the image generated may not enough for training, like it's really bad. So we would like to filter out those images. So yeah, so as you can see that after domain adaptation, there are some images that really really far from the blue one. So we would like to exclude the image from our data set. The last thing I would like to talk about is the IBM net. So the IBM net is just like a technique when they try to incorporate instant norm layer into the block unit so that it can learn image without caring about the style. As you can see that the cast here, they have different style, but after through the instant norm layer, they just look the same. So in the end, we conclude that our model outperform other state-of-the-art methods, and we also prove that data is not really matter because in a table we use less data, but we have actually superior performance. And that's also the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Wonderful job. If you have any questions, you can put them in the chat to me as the host, or you can ask those out loud. I'll read one out loud right here that's for us. How are NVIDIA GPUs used in this project? How are you partitioning your data in parallel?
So actually the PyTorch, they provide a library to do that parallel learning. So actually I just split the data, into batches, and every batches will be split into 4 because I have 4 GPUs, so that it will fit that. And after that, they will perform computing, and they perform backpropagation in every patch, and then they average across the patches. So we use a library.
Thank you. I have a second question for you. This one's a little more open. It's how can you improve your work on this project?
Actually, I think there's a lot of things we can improve, like because we use a lot of data set, but we actually only use the vehicle ready data set. We don't use the other things. Like actually we can use other images like the image net. It's not the vehicle ready, it's just vehicle image. It's not specifically for vehicle ready. So I don't use that because it's really far from our domain. But I want to improve our work by learning every available data set. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Are there any further questions that you would like to ask? All right, well, fantastic job, Quang. Thank you so much for presenting this year. All right, at 12:54, we'll begin our next presentation. So we've got about a minute. So if you need to leave this room, you can do that. All right. I would like to go ahead and introduce our next speaker for today. This is Eliandriana Cruz Barrios, and she'll be speaking to us today about the determination of critical micelle concentration from diffusion-driven dilution of micellar aqueous mixtures. If you have any questions, please post those to me in the chat, and we will be sure to answer those at the very end of our presentation. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to my presentation. Today, I want to talk about the determination of critical micelle concentration from a diffusion-driven dilution of micellar aqueous solution. First, I would like to start by defining what are surfactants. These are organic molecules with a hydrophilic head that likes water and a hydrophobic tail that does not like water. In solutions, surfactant molecules form spherical aggregates known as micelles, and the minimal concentration of surfactant required to form this micelle is known as the critical micelle concentration. This is a very important value that is specific of each type of surfactant and is directly related to its application that can go from everyday household items to oil recovery and drug carriers, to name a few. Our research interest is to characterize the effect of salt gradients on micelle migration for applications in oil recovery. In order to do that, it is important to precisely determine the effect of salts on the CMC. And in some cases, these changes are so small they are difficult to obtain with the current methods. With that in mind, we wanted to develop a new method where we use concentration profiles to generate about a diffusion-driven dilution of a micellar solution in water to determine the CMC. The experiment starts out of a cell with two separate compartments, the top compartment with pure water and the bottom compartment with a micellar solution. When this separation is removed and the two solutions come into contact, the micelles start moving up by diffusion, diluting themselves into water until at some point the micelles dissociate into the surfactant monomers. The concentration at which this happens will be the CMC. And because the smaller surfactants diffuse much faster than the larger micelle, we should be able to observe an abrupt change in the diffusion when the dissociation happens, allowing us to pinpoint the CMC values. Additionally, this method will be non-invasive, require a single sample preparation, and can be applied for both types of surfactants. But experimentally, how do we characterize concentration profiles during diffusion? Where we are going to use a radar interferometry with our one-of-a-kind TCU green monster. This is a 29-foot-long instrument that happens to be painted in green. So let's consider first a simple case of diffusion. For example, sodium chloride with no micelles involved and no abrupt changes in diffusion. Initially, the concentration profile look like a step. And after diffusion starts, our concentration profile starts changing. A green laser that goes through the sample generates this interferometry pattern for which we can extract the information of the result concentration profile as a function of distance and time to account for diffusion. The graph to the right is a different representation of the concentration profile, and we'll see later why is important we have both graphs. Because here there is no abrupt change in diffusion, none of these curves have inflection points. But for our micelle case, we expect to be able to see an inflection point at the CMC. Let's see how we did. These are the results for three different types of well-known surfactants, ionic and non-ionic. In this point, it's evident that in the bottom curves, we can see the inflection point here, and that's what we need both curves. We can see better that point here. Look at the position, go to the curve on the top, and by visual inspection, know where our CMC value is. However, we went one step further and we also deduced a theoretical model to more precisely determine the CMC using the method of least squares. The fitting of that method are these black solid lines. On the right table, we can see how all our values are in very good agreement with the literature values. Very briefly, I just wanted to show you how the model looks like, but the details about this model are in our more recent publication. Finally, we test our method performance in detecting changes on the CMC on a non-ionic surfactant Triton X100 in the presence of three uniform concentrations of three different salts. Here, we can observe that the biggest effect was for sodium sulfate, and that in general, the salt reduces the CMC of the Triton X100, which means it pays for micelle stability. It's also interesting to see that the salt effects here follow the same trend observed for protein stability in the presence of salts. In conclusion, we were able to develop a new method for the determination of surfactant CMC based on diffusion-based dilution of micellar solutions, and we also were able to develop a theoretical model for it. This method was applied for three different types of surfactant, and we could analyze the effects of salt on the CMC. It's important to remark that this method is very precise and enables CMC determination from a single sample, which is not available on any of the current methods. With that, I'd like to thank to my advisor, Onofrio Anunciara, and the TCU Research and Creativity Funds for funding this research. I'm open to questions now.
Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. I have your first question. So the comment first off is excellent research. Congratulations. The question that follows, is there an effect of the geometry of the micelles on the determination you are aiming?
No, this is a spontaneous thermodynamic process that happens of aggregation of the surfactant molecules due to that part of the surfactant that doesn't like water. So at certain concentration, they're far more comfortable, is a way to say, aggregating with each other. And the most stable or the most common structure is the spherical one.
Very nice. Does anyone have any remaining questions? All right, we'll conclude your presentation then. Thank you so much, and thank you for participating. All right, we do have a little bit of a break. Our next presenter is at 1:10 p.m. And so we'll take a break between now and then, and we'll see you right here at 1:10.
To those who had completed all or some parts of the training. I received limited responses due to the time that I had to actually conduct the survey, but I'm so sorry about the car alarm. I can hear in the background, but yeah, limited responses due to some time, but still had enough to gather really good qualitative data to evaluate this survey. The training. So I used 6 guiding questions to conduct my research, and through those was able to synthesize different data points from the research. And the main 4 of those were that first and foremost, which was really exciting, we got a report back that there was frequent and confident use of TBRI in classrooms, and that participants felt really equipped to use TBRI. The second point was that there was a strong desire for more classroom content. And this wasn't something that we expected to hear, but it was really good feedback to get. And that was really that a lot of the training is set up in situations that are one-to-one. So a lot of the training content is one-to-one, which doesn't really mirror a classroom setting. And so hearing this was helpful to learn. The third thing was that one barrier to implementation that people were having with TBRI, specifically educators, was meeting the physiological strategies. And those include making sure the kids are well fed, well hydrated, well rested. And we got multiple reports back that those things were hard to meet as an educator, just based on material resources. And then finally, we got reports that a lack of organizational buy-in can hinder the implementation of TBRI. And we've seen this in other settings, but it was highlighted here in the sense that a lot of these were people training individually and then trying to bring it back to their organizations. So in light of these findings, I've prepared 3 recommendations to guide future research or to modify future trainings. And the first is to provide examples and resources to the people being trained on how they can overcome the barriers to those physiological strategies. And in other contexts, this is worked through local nonprofits or churches or things like that work with TBRI caregivers to help make sure that if it's snacks or water bottles and things like that, that those needs can be met. And then my second one is providing and developing resources for organizational buy-in for participants who are interested in trying to bring TBRI to their organization. And my final recommendation is that future trainings that are provided to educators would be updated to include more classroom-based content, so it's more replicable in their TBRI practice. And with that, I have completed my research. I am really excited by what we found and how it will influence further trainings and hopefully create more successful implementation of TBRI in classrooms. I'd like to acknowledge Dr. Casey Call, who supported me during this research, as well as Dr. Danica Knight, Dr. Lynn Hampton, and Glenda Mills. I'll now take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan, and thank you for your research. That's wonderful. Does anybody have any questions for Morgan? All right, any questions? All right, thank you so much, Morgan. You did a great job. We appreciate you presenting this year with SRS.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, our next speaker will be up at 1:18. All right, Sally, if you want to go ahead and be getting prepared, we'll get you started right at 1:18. All right, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next speaker to you. So Sally Ho will be speaking to us about life history congruency. At the end of her presentation, you may ask questions via the chat to me, the host, and I will read those aloud to Sally so she can answer them for you. All right, Sally, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, thank you so much. Let me start with sharing our screen. Okay. Okay, I know this like doesn't like give the whole thing. If you can see, like, is it too small for you to see or not at all? Okay, I will just zoom in if there's something that I want to focus on. So we usually hear saying that don't judge the book by the cover because we are often so quick to assume about persons, even though we don't know the living situations, the history, and the hardships that the person's been through. So life history theory is an evolutionary based framework in social psychology to explain why individuals from different backgrounds and ecologies exert different behaviors and strategies to solve their adaptive problems. So the current propositions is that individuals from harsh ecologies, so think of environments that are scarce, unpredictable, high mortality risks, think, for example, like trailer parks environments or similarly difficult neighborhoods. These individuals tend to engage in fast life strategies. So for example, they tend to have multiple sex partners, they have sex earlier, they are less likely to use contraceptive, they spend very impulsively, and they don't really plan for education or careers. In contrast, benign ecologies, so think of your typical nice middle-class American neighborhood, these individuals from these environments tend to engage in slower life strategies. So they are, more likely to delay sex. They plan for the career and education, and they are less likely to spend impulsively. So without a nuanced understanding of how ecologies and how living environments shape people's behaviors, we might it may be easier for us to perceive that fast life strategies like having sex early, not really planning for your finance, as poor decision making. So for our research in our first study, we investigate whether individuals from harsh ecologies, so lower SES backgrounds, are more understanding of fast behaviors compared to those from higher SES and more benign ecologies. In the second study, we investigate whether does having knowledge or cues of one person's ecology or environment can change people's perceptions of their behaviors. So for our first study, it was correlational. It was conducted here at TCU, and we had participants come in and rate how moral or wise for a person to engage in slow behaviors or fast behaviors. So for example, slow behaviors can be like, is it wise for this person to plan for education, or for a fast behavior can be like, is it moral or wise for this person to engage in multiple sex partners? And then we will measure their, SES backgrounds. For a second study, it was experimental. So we recruit persons at TCU. We randomly assign them to view either a trailer park environment. So right here, this is stimuli that's very used very often in life history research, or they will view a typical benign, nice American neighborhood right here, and they will rate whether it is wise or moral for a person from each of this in ecology to engage in certain fast or slow behaviors. So our results reveal that overall, people rate slow behaviors as wiser and more moral compared to fast behaviors. However, within the fast behaviors, individuals from low SES have a more favorable view of those behaviors. So it confirmed our hypothesis that people from lower SES are more understanding of fast behaviors. And for our second study, we also discovered same findings that overall people rated slow behaviors as wiser and more moral compared to fast behaviors. However, within each behavior, so for the fast behaviors, people from harsh ecologies, because they are provided with cues about the environments that are harsh and unpredictable, they rated these behaviors as more wise. So they have a more understanding favorable view of these behaviors. And for the slow behaviors, within the slow behaviors, people who are provided cues about benign ecology, they rate slow behaviors more favorable. So this result shows that reminders and cues about a person's ecology or living situation does matter in how other people view their behaviors and strategies. So some key takeaways from these findings is that our results support our hypothesis, and is that people from lower SES are more likely to be understanding of fast behaviors, and having knowledge of a person's ecology and living environments can change how other people view their behaviors. And one of our limitations is that this study was conducted at TCU, so it's a higher SES population, so they may have they may be more familiar with fast behaviors. However, these these findings are very important in changing implicit biases or in the criminal justice system, where if we present a person's living situations, environments, their past behaviors to the jury or to judges, maybe that can change or influence how their behaviors and judgment of these individuals. And that concludes my presentation. So I think I can stop sharing now. Awesome.
Thank you, Sally. We appreciate that presentation.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Sally? It's a very interesting topic. All right, here's one. Could you expand on what you think is the most interesting future direction for this research?
Like I said, I think it can be very influential in the criminal justice system. So in our lab, the lead researcher who did the studies, so it was Katya, she told me that those slow behaviors such as, delay sex or less impulsive spending, if you plan for your career and finance and those stuff, they map perfectly to like the behaviors that judges and jury tend to prefer in, like a court case and similar situations like that. So if we present these findings, this theory, and how a person's ecology or living situations can influence their behaviors, maybe the judges and the jury can be more understanding of those behaviors. Because in our study too, we show that having cues and reminders of a person's ecology can change a person's perceptions of their behaviors. So I think that's a good direction where these findings can go.
Thank you, Sally. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for participating.
Thank you, of course.
All right, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Clayton Frymuth is going to be speaking to us on a topic, determining leab hardness and its controlling factors to assess the strength of sedimentary rocks. Right, so Clayton, right, you should be able to take it away here. Thank you.
Alrighty, let me. Okay, so yeah, my name is Clayton, and I'll be talking about my research that I did in the Department of Geology. It's determining leab hardness and its controlling factors to assess the strength of sedimentary rocks. So there's been a bunch of previous research done that's linked rock hardness to rock strength, but many previous studies have not taken a holistic approach as to what governs each. Some of the properties that have been studied in previous studies have been volume, mineralogy, which is what comprises the rock, so silica, calcium carbonate, other chemicals like that, density, and others such as porosity or the void space present in a rock. And so what I wanted to look at was which properties out of these govern rock hardness, but also do they govern rock strength? And so that's what I examined in my research. And one of the main tools I used in this research was the Bambino rebound hammer. It was invented by Dietmar Lieb in 1977 to test the hardness of metals and other man-made materials like ceramics. And this instrument gives you the leab hardness. So it's a unit specific to this tool, and leab hardness is the ratio of impact velocity over a final velocity times 1,000. So in the diagram below, you can see in the middle, there's an initial velocity that there's a bit in the tool that strikes the material, and then the resultant velocity, SR, that's your final velocity. Some of the methods I used in my analysis for hardness testing using the Bambino, both prior to and after drying my samples. I also utilized the axial load cell machine within the rock prep room in the geology department. And then I conducted various physical measurements. I measured effective porosity, density, and volume for each of my samples. And finally, I used X-ray diffraction analysis, and I utilized Rietveld refinement, which is a sort of pattern matching algorithm that you can use on various softwares. And I used all this to make determinations for my data. And I analyzed all this data using Spearman's rank order correlation, which ranks median values for every data set against other median values. And it's a way you can do some regression analysis and figure out which variables correlate strongly with other variables. And so some of the results I received were, there were certain groups of rocks that were harder or softer as a whole compared to others. So for instance, in the upper left-hand corner, we have hardness, and you'll notice there's one group at the very top. Those are novaculites. They're basically made of completely of glass, silica dioxide. Then moving over to effective porosity, there's a lot of overlap, and that's what I noticed in a lot of my samples. There were some that had very low effective porosities, such as novaculites and conglomerates, but for the most part, they all overlapped. And I saw that a lot in my density measurements and in my strength measurements, which are shown in the bottom right. However, when I combined the previous data sets with my mineralogical analyses, I noticed that rocks with higher silica content on the whole were harder and stronger than rocks that had more calcium carbonate, or rocks that comprised or were composed of mainly of clay. And you can see that stronger rocks have hotter colors, and then if they're harder, they have bigger circles. And so there seems to be a hierarchical relationship between the two. Silica-rich rocks are harder and stronger. Then you have carbonate rocks, and then finally you have clay-rich rocks, which are weaker and softer. And this is kind of bared out in my Spearman rank order correlation analysis. What I found was hardness correlated with rock strength, rock density, and effective porosity. And then rock strength correlated with density and effective porosity. So there was some overlap there, and density correlated with effective porosity. Moving on with my XRD analysis, the only mineralogical relationship I saw was between quartz and feldspars, or my silicates, and hardness. Carbonates and clays didn't really enter into the equation and didn't factor into rock hardness or strength, at least in a statistically significant manner. But then again, other properties were the same as in the diagram before. So once again, hardness was correlated to strength, density, and effective porosity, and then strength and density were correlated to effective porosity. So what I found was relationships between hardness, strength, and a rock's intrinsic properties validate previous studies. Hardness and strength have similar relationships to independent properties, and the relationship between mineralogy and mechanical properties in the study validate previous studies, although I explicitly showed with XRD analysis that mineralogy could relate to mechanical properties in rocks. And those are my references.
All right, thank you, Clayton. We appreciate your presentation. Does anyone have any questions that they'd like to ask Clayton? All right, here's one. I assume rock would behave more like a brittle material than a ductile material. Could you explain how you used an axial load technique instead of a bending test to determine strength?
Yeah, so the axial load technique, I used it primarily because that was the machinery I had available to me, but it gives you the unconfined compressive strength, which you saw in my presentation was UCS. And that's a base level measure used in many different industries to give a baseline number or assign a number to a rock mass. So it's just the unconfined compressive strength. Other industries do use bending tests, but since I had the load cell at my disposal here on campus, I opted to go for the UCS because it was, expedient and gave me numbers that I could use and tie into previous research.
Thank you for that answer. Are there any other questions you guys would like to ask? All right. Well, thank you again for your presentation, Clayton. We appreciate having you here at TCU. All right. Our next presentation, we can go ahead and begin to set up, is Alex Burgess. Alex will be speaking on university students' knowledge and attitudes of a whole foods, plant-based diet. And as we've done with other presentations, you can put your questions into the chat box and I will read those aloud to Alex at the very end. Take it away, Alex.
Thank you so much. So hi, my name is Alex Burgess, and I'm actually presenting with my co-researcher, Catherine Kreider, today. We are both seniors in the coordinated program in dietetics at TCU, and today we'll be discussing our research on university students' knowledge and attitudes of a whole foods plant-based diet. Before we begin, I just want to give a quick thank you to Dr. Ann Van Bieber, Dr. Kelly Fisher, and Dr. Lynn Dart, who all served as research advisors for this project. Catherine, are you able to see that? I think this next slide is yours.
I'll have to make Catherine a co-host real quick.
Oh, gotcha.
Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So as you can tell from the title, the purpose of this research was to determine university students' general knowledge and attitudes regarding a whole foods plant-based diet. And then we'll get into what that is on the next slide.
Yeah, so to give a little bit of background information on this study, we were looking at this whole foods plant-based diet, which really just places an emphasis on eating fresh, non-processed foods. So that includes things like vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and nuts and seeds.
So from our literature review, what we found are that some of the common concerns about a whole foods plant-based diet surround the idea that it doesn't provide enough of certain nutrients. Some of the nutrients of concern include iron, which is common in meat, calcium, which is abundant in dairy products, which some people plant-based diet might exclude, and then protein, which is of course more associated with animal products. So what we actually found from our research, whole foods plant-based diet is not only adequate in these nutrients, but also reduces the risk for certain chronic diseases, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, and cancer.
So our study design was a 28-question cross-sectional survey, and we used SurveyMonkey. So in order to be included in this study, participants had to be at least 18 years old and currently attending a college or university. And then they also, of course, had to have access to the internet since the survey was taken online. We analyzed our data using a program called SPSS, and we found Pearson correlation coefficients with that. And this study was approved by the TCU Institutional Review Board.
So in total, we had 209 people respond to our survey. About 80% were female and 20% were male. 48% of the participants were non-health science majors, whereas 52% of them were nutrition or other health science majors. And then 53% of participants had never taken a nutrition course before, and the other 47% had taken at least one nutrition course at some point during their college career.
So our results showed that there was an increased level of nutrition knowledge associated with having a better understanding of what it means to follow a whole foods plant-based diet. So really we were considering those who had taken nutrition courses or those who were in the health sciences and nutrition majors to have had a higher level of nutrition education. And so then with that, we also saw that this increase in knowledge was associated with more positive attitudes and beliefs towards the whole foods plant-based diet. And then finally, we found that there was many significant correlations between sex and then other variables. So in general, we were able to see that males were more likely to have negative attitudes and beliefs towards the whole foods plant-based diet.
All right, so kind of reinforcing what Alex just mentioned on the results slide, from this study, we can conclude that increased nutrition knowledge is associated with more positive attitudes regarding whole foods plant-based diet, and that this diet is easily accessible to the university age population.
We just had a couple limitations. First of all, there was a couple overlaps between the questions, so this could have confused participants. Additionally, we did use a convenience sample, mostly got our participants from emails through the nutrition department. And in the future, we might want to do a randomized controlled trial just to see whether this diet is really feasible with university students and look at the specific health outcomes that might change as a result of following the diet.
So ways that we can apply this research to the real world. This research supports the importance of nutrition education in universities. It also supports the value of dietitians as they play an important role in nutrition education and the associated positive attitudes and habits regarding healthy eating patterns. It can also be used to encourage nutrition education for university students that may lead to an improvement in knowledge level and attitudes regarding healthy diets and lifestyle habits.
There's our references. And we've got some time for questions.
All right, great. You've got questions popping up already. So the first, any idea to increase participation of the survey from the male population?
You want me to answer that?
Go for it, yeah.
So we did our best to send it out to as many of our professors that we've had, and it just consequently, a lot of the classes that we've personally taken from in our majors like are primarily female. We did hit on a lot of business students, which were where we got a lot of the male students from. But in the future, like if we were to do it again, I definitely just try to reach out to professors, even if we haven't had them before, and see if they'd be willing to send our survey out to people in their classes that might have more male students.
The second question kind of piggybacks on that. Why do you suspect males are more likely to have a negative attitude about this diet? Do they just feel it's somehow masculine to eat meat? Do you have a sense of this? Also, how did their views correlate with their relative fitness? And did you get some sort of fitness measurement from your participants?
I can definitely speak to the first part with, looking at the data, we saw that there was a significant correlation between males and then, so males were less likely to be in those nutrition and health science majors. So it's likely that the education factor was really coming into play there. But I do think there's also some social factors that might have contributed to males kind of having more negative attitudes towards plant-based eating.
Yeah, there are correlations with males kind of agreeing with the statement that they wouldn't get all the nutrients that they need if they didn't eat meat, such as protein, things like that. But that kind of just goes back to saying like it's an education thing. Like a lot of them hadn't taken a nutrition course or weren't health science majors, and so they had less education than the females that respond to our survey. That's a really good question.
I'll give you 10 seconds to answer the last one. So were participants screened for any pre-existing conditions that could have impacted their perceptions? And if so, any trends?
They were not screened for that, so no.
All right, Alex and Catherine, thank you guys both for presenting at SRS this year. We appreciate your research.
Thank you.
All right, our next speaker today is going to be Isabella Aguiar. She's going to be speaking to us on optimizing the synthesis of macrocycles. And of course, if you have any questions, please post those in the chat and I'll be sure to read those aloud for her when she completes her presentation. All right, you may go ahead and begin, Isabella.
Hi, my name is Isabella Aguiar. Today I'll be presenting on optimizing the synthesis of macrocycles. So what exactly are macrocycles? Macrocycles are molecules that consist of a ring of 12 or more atoms. They have seen a recent resurgence of interest for their potential in drug design due to their large surface area that allows them to grab onto target proteins of a disease pathway. The reason that macrocycles have been overlooked in the past, however, is because of the difficulty of creating giant rings of atoms. So today I'll be discussing my research of looking into optimal ways of synthesizing macrocycles, specifically synthesizing them by incorporating the amino acid glycine. So on this slide, I have presented the steps of creating a macrocycle, including glycine. Each step consists of adding a molecule onto the growing ring until finally the molecule undergoes cyclization to become a macrocycle. Today, I'll be focusing on the first 3 steps and the progress I made with each. So in the first step of synthesis, cyanuric chloride will be attached to Bock hydrazide. This reaction occurs by adding an equivalent of each reactant into a flask with an equivalent of base, which I used diisopropyl ethylamine, and the reaction was allowed to occur overnight. For each of the steps of synthesis, the reaction progress was checked with thin layer chromatography, or TLC. We looked at the reaction progress under UV light, see on the left, and then we stained the plates with ninhydrin, a dye, which can be seen on the right. So I ran 3 lanes on my gel, 1 for each of the reactants. And then if you look at the middle lane, that's the reaction 1 product. If we look at the UV plate, cyanuric chloride is UV active, so we should see something show up on the plate. Bock hydrazide is not UV active, so nothing should show up. And the final product, since it contains cyanuric chloride, should be UV active, which is consistent with the plate here. If we look on the right, we see a yellow streak for the reaction 1 product, which indicates that the reaction went to completion. Step 2 consists of the addition of glycine into the reaction flask. 1 equivalent of glycine is added with another equivalent of base, and the reaction is placed under reflux. The TLC that ran here show a successful addition of glycine. So if we look at the ninhydrin plate, in this lane, I have the reaction 1 product, the reaction 2 product here, and a co-spot where I have a drop from each of these molecules onto this lane. And we can see yellow here, which indicates the reaction 1 product. And since we have an absence of yellow in the middle, we can assume that the reaction went to completion. Step 3 consists of the addition of morpholine, which proved that adding a bunch of things onto a ring can be difficult. With the morpholine, another equivalent of base is added to the reaction flask and allowed to stir overnight. At this point in synthesis, the reaction progress is analyzed via NMR, or nuclear magnetic resonance, where each of these peaks here is associated with a hydrogen on the molecule. So my first time undergoing this step, I added 4 equivalents of morpholine, which proved to be a little too much. If we look here at around 3.0 to 3.5 ppm, we have some characteristic peaks for morpholine. But if we look at 1.4 around here, we're missing a Bach hydrazide peak. So something went wrong during synthesis. So with my next attempt, I added in 2 equivalents, which still kind of was a little too much. 3.0 to 3.5, we don't even have the characteristic morpholine peak that it was attached. And I'm still missing that 1.4 Bach hydrazide peak. So my third attempt proved to be a little bit more successful. This time I added just 1 equivalent of morpholine and base. This seemed to be the sweet spot. I have a 1.4 peak here of Bach hydrazide and the 3.0 to 3.5 peaks for morpholine. We noticed some other weird peaks on the NMR, but we assumed that it probably was due to impurities, so we thought they would clear up after purification. So now that we have confirmation of the formation of the third product, we need to purify the sample to prepare for the addition of amino acetyl and cyclization. Normally this would be done via column chromatography, a purification process, but a lot of other students in the lab had issues with solubility after this step, but we're not successful with column chromatography, but we're more successful with extraction, another type of purification process. So an extraction was attempted. Getting my product to dissolve was a little difficult. Eventually we were successful with adding a lot of chloroform, but confused about the solubility, we checked the pH of the product and we found that it was very acidic, which was odd since I added in multiple equivalents of base throughout the first 3 steps of synthesis. This could indicate that maybe more base will be needed for future attempts of synthesis. However, to get the pH fixed for this time, bicarbonate was added, and these are the results of the first fraction via TLC. We don't have any movement of the product from the baseline, which implies that the product was all in the first fraction, impurities were removed. I'm going to need NMR readings to confirm this, but with this data, we can continue on with synthesis. So overall, there were a lot of issues concerning solubility after the addition of morpholine in the third step. So figuring out optimal amounts of morpholine to put in an efficient purification process will be the focus of further purification attempts. In addition, with the highly acidic step 3 product, the type and amount of base will also be further researched into to optimize synthesis. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabella. Oh, and Dr. Smonik agrees here in the comments. Beautiful discussion of chemistry. Way to go.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask? Follow-up is, how can we get you to come back? I agree with that. Another congrats here from Dr. Green. Great job, Isabella. Oh, we do have a question for you. Is the NMR the only test to determine the equation? Is that the correct interpretation of that, Antonio? Okay. So is the NMR the only test to determine the equation?
The equation is, can I get a clarification for anyone who asked the question? Sorry, I'm a little confused.
Formula.
The formula.
Okay.
Oh, just like the product, like in my flask, if that's what you're asking?
The chemical synthesis, does that clarify it for you?
Oh, okay, I think so.
Okay.
So I also did TLCs for that step. They were like kind of messy, and NMR is way more accurate in determining reaction progress. And since I had so many issues with purification, I just that's why I showed the NMR to like definitely confirm that that was what was in my reaction flask, if that answers your question.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Follow-up question. What are the applications of this study?
Yeah, so I said at the beginning, macrocycles have some implication for drug design due to their surface area. They're like large molecules to grab onto target proteins and disease pathways. So that's kind of like drug design, synthesis, stuff like that, hopefully for drug purposes.
All right, thank you. It is 1:50, so if you need to leave and move to a different talk, you may. I'll go ahead. Isabella, do you want to take one more question?
Sure.
Okay. What was the most challenging step for you?
Step 3. Yeah, the first 2 steps, after doing step 3 so many times, I was able to get through them really fast. Pretty simple, but step 3, there was a lot of issues with solubility. And finally, that's that final NMR where it finally attached, where all the peaks I had was a good day.
When Dr. Simonik is commenting here, it turns out that we thought that glycine would be easiest out of all the amino acids, but it's probably one of the hardest. Come back and you can have phenylalanine.
Sounds good.
Well, thank you, Isabella. Fantastic research, and thank you for your great presentation today.
Thank you.
All right, we have our final presentation of this session beginning at 1:58, so you have a little bit of a break, but we will start right at 1:58. Again, thank you all for your attendance this year. In our final presentation for the day, Ryan Moncrief will be presenting for us Ready, Set, Go, a web application for Go AI research and play. Thank you so much, Ryan. You may begin.
All right, I will share our poster here. All right, hello everybody. As she said before, I'm Ryan Moncrief and I'm representing my team, also including Christian Arciniega, Derek Isensee, Ryan Clements, and Kian Nguyen, and we are Ready, Set, Go, a web application for Go AI research and play. And this is our senior design project. So I'll start by giving a little bit of background information on our project. In the last few years, there have been major breakthroughs in AI research for Go, which is a Chinese board game similar to chess. And this is a big deal because previously AI for Go was thought to be too algorithmically complex to even make a reasonable AI to be able to play against. So this has spawned a lot of research projects across the world, including one by several departments at TCU, headed by Dr. Zeli Dao and Dr. Liran Ma, researching different properties and training of Go AI. The problem is that their project is not very accessible and it's not very user-friendly. It's limited to the people only working exclusively on the campus, and the commands for training the AI are very clunky. They involve very long console commands, so it's not very user-friendly and not very accessible. And that is where we come in. We have made a web application that is a lot more user-friendly for this training of AI that I'll get into more detail in a moment, and also expanding on it to be a lot more accessible from anywhere and by a lot more people. Even if you're not researching AI, you can learn and play Go against the AI that we have trained. So I'll start talking about some of our site features. Obviously, you'll be able to play Go against AI. You can select different AI that have been published by researchers and choose which color you want to be and various other parameters for the game. Also, if you're a researcher, which is a process that is carried out once you make an account on the website, you'll be able to use a lot more user-friendly interface to set parameters and train the AI. And then once that's begun, you can watch the training in real time. We have various numerical stats showing the different progress through the different games and generations that are being simulated, as well as ELO graphs that show the graphical progress of this training. For our site security, you'll be creating an account. And when you do that, you have to succeed on a CAPTCHA and verify your email. And the entire site is protected with HTTPS, which is a common internet security protocol. So we just want to make sure that no hackers or bots are trying to bombard our site, especially because it's hosted on TCU servers, which I'll get into with our system architecture. And this is where a lot of our development time and a lot of the challenges we ran into arise, is that because we are adapting an existing project to be moved online, that involves a lot of different servers, a lot of different moving parts that we had to all mesh together into one working cohesive application. So we have a main server on Spring Boot that is hosting sort of the main site and the React front end, which is all of the pretty things that you see on the website itself, as well as a lot of the gameplay. We have a second server exclusively for the training and the research hosted in Node.js, and that's a GPU server. We also have a backend database also stored off of the server for all of the user data and training of the AI agents. And we also have different web sockets that are used when a user starts a game. So that way multiple users can be playing the game on the website at the same time without clashing or interfering with each other. So with all of these different servers and it being hosted on TCU's website, which has its own firewalls instead of security protocols, a lot of our time in development was spent trying to make all of this work in of application, making it user-friendly, and working with the IT department to make sure that everything worked perfectly on the TCU system. And I think we succeeded in creating a website that is both fun and easy to use for Go and for the research project that already exists. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Ryan. We appreciate that presentation. Is there anyone that has any questions for Ryan at this time? All right, this first comment says, congratulations, Ryan and team. Truly impressive work.
Thank you very much. We've been working on this for quite a while and we're pretty happy with how it turned out.
Follow-up question is, how can someone access this? I think you had it in your image, correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So this is a site that should be accessible to anyone at the very least on TCU's campus at ai.tcu.edu. So this is a public website that anyone can make an account and play against published AI. But if you want to be a researcher, that's a process that you'll have to apply for during your account creation. And someone who's already an admin or part of the research project will have to approve you for that.
Are there any further questions for Ryan and his team? I can tell you we bought Go this last year, and I think complex was the right word to describe this game. I don't know how you learn the rules well enough to design an AI format.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. That is one of the interesting things, is that it was so algorithmically complex that everyone was just thinking, oh, there are chess bots. How could this be so different? But it's so much more complex. There are hundreds of thousands of moves at any given time. So it's impressive work to be able to create an AI that can play this.
Well, congratulations, you guys. It's an excellent project.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, thank you, Ryan, so much for presenting. And thank you all for attending this year. We really appreciate the support that you give our students in so many ways, including getting to see them here at the end with all their hard work. All right, so everyone take care, have a wonderful weekend, and enjoy the rest of the spring.